So, because with the world that we live in, there's a lot of uncertainty around how large negative externalities and positive externalities actually are. What some folks suggest is that rather than making painstaking efforts to identify these costs, um, and impose some type of tax subsidy or quota, especially when if we're wrong, there can be devastating effects for markets, that instead we take advantage of markets and their ability to generate knowledge through prices and just price externalities instead. So one very popular way of pricing pollution, for example, of creating a market for pollution, is through things like tradable permits, where regulatory agencies, it could be the government, it could be an organization like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, or it could be, local nonprofit groups, work to create these tradable permits and allocate them to firms or other individuals who are contributing to the generation of a negative externality. And so the tradable permit sort of works as a quota with a price. So it means that they're going to try to limit, for example, the amount of electricity generation so that pollution is kept at closer to its optimal level. But the market for them, for those tradable permits, allows that quota to be implemented at the lowest cost or the lowest price. And this is because what we um, know and what we often see is that firms or producers are going to vary very dramatically in their ability to reduce their pollution, right? For some firms, maybe they're very small, it's going to be very hard to buy the newest technology that reduces emissions the most. Whereas potentially for very large producers, it makes a lot of sense and it helps them sort of meet consumers' demand not only for their product, but for the production processes that have smaller impacts on the climate. And so by purchasing up tradable permits, those firms that can reduce pollution at a lower cost, right, lower opportunity costs, ensure that we get closer to that optimal level of pollution without introducing the deadweight loss that a quota without this nuance that tradable permits would impose. Okay. And again, these come from the fact that it's hard for for regulators to identify which firms are going to be best able to reduce their pollution, reduce their emissions. And many firms are not going to know how much, pollution needs to be reduced socially, right, for a given area. And so these uncertainties, these fundamental uncertainties that we face are overcome by relying on markets for the ability to produce. Okay. All right. So that is going to be all that we'll cover tradable permits for. If you want more discussion of tradable permits, Dr. Brown goes into depth about them in his environmental economics class, which I highly recommend. But after this, we're going to look at the Coase theorem and property rights specification and court adjudication as our final ways to address externalities.